The summer heat in New Orleans didn't just cling to the skin, it seeped into the bones. By late July, the air in Treme was thick with a heavy honeyed warmth that carried the faint scent of magnolia blossoms from the corner trees, mixing with the metallic tang of the old streetcar tracks. The houses leaned into each other like tired friends, their paint peeling in colors that had once been bright turquoise mustard coral, now muted and faded under decades of sun. Somewhere down the block, a trumpet cried out a wandering note, as if even the music was searching for something it had lost. Inside one of those narrow shotgun apartments, Zara Garcia sat at a small, wobbly kitchen table. The ceiling fan overhead spun lazily, doing little more than pushing the heat from one corner of the room to the other. A chipped mug of cold coffee rested beside a stack of bills, rent, electricity, water, and a debt from her unfinished courses at Delgado Community College that had followed her like a shadow for years. She stared at the numbers until they blurred. She was 25, with the beauty that wasn't about perfection, but about resilience. Rich brown skin, almond-shaped eyes that had weathered storms most people never saw coming, and a cascade of natural curls pulled into a loose bun. Detours and dead ends had shaped her life. At 19, she had given birth to Leo, her son, whose very existence had been both the anchor and the sail that kept her from drifting into despair. But it had also meant shelving her plans for a degree in hospitality management, shelving her dreams so she could keep the lights on and the fridge barely stocked. On the floor nearby, Leo sat cross-legged, scribbling furiously on a crumpled sheet of paper with half-broken colored pencils. He had her eyes, though brighter, untouched by the world's heaviness, and a smile that could undo her instantly. "Mom," he announced proudly, holding up his drawing, "I drew you as a superhero." Zara's lips curved into a smile, even as her chest ached. The picture showed her in a cape standing in front of a tall, sunlit building with Leo holding her hand. "You made me strong," she said softly, taking the paper from him. She wanted him to have more than she'd had, more than secondhand shoes, more than weekends spent worrying if the rent check would bounce. She wanted him to feel safe enough to dream. But dreams didn't pay bills. And 6 months ago, the French Quarter bar where she worked as a bartender had let half the staff go. The owner had called it tightening the sails, but to Zara, it had felt like having the floor ripped out from under her. Since then, she'd been doing odd jobs, cleaning houses in the Garden District, delivering takeout orders across the city, but none was enough. Every month was a tightrope walk over a pit she could feel yawning wider beneath her. That night, after she put Leo to bed on their shared twin mattress, Zara sat by the open window, the faint hum of the streetlights and distant music drifting in. She clutched her old phone, scrolling through job postings. Each one seemed to close its doors to her before she even stepped through. Must have 5 years experience. Bachelor's degree required. She could almost hear those words locking her out, same as always. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the darkness. She pressed her palm over her mouth to muffle the sob threatening to escape. Leo was asleep just a few feet away, and she refused to let him see her crack. He believed she could fix anything, and so she would somehow. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alina, a friend she hadn't worked with since the bar closed. "Zara, I saw this online and thought of you. It's unusual, but it pays well. Might be worth a shot." Attached was a link to a job posting. Zara's thumb hovered over it before she tapped. Personal caretaker wanted for private estate in the Garden District. High salary. Discretion required. Long-term commitment. Her first thought was that it sounded too vague. A personal caretaker could mean anything from cooking and cleaning to more personal tasks she wasn't sure she could stomach, and discretion required. That could mean the family had something to hide. But her eyes kept snagging on those two words, high salary. She thought of Leo, of new school clothes in September, of paying off the debt that kept her credit score buried, of weekends in Audubon Park without worrying if there was enough left for groceries. Still doubt pressed in. She'd been judged all her life by strangers for being a single mother, by relatives for throwing away her future, by employers who saw only what was missing on her resume. What if she applied and they turned her away without even meeting her? What if it was a trap? Her hand trembled as she opened her old laptop, a gift from her mother before she passed. The keys stuck in places, but she began to type her words raw and straightforward. I am a single mother, willing to work hard to provide a better life for my son. I don't have much experience, but I have determination and honesty. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. Then she closed her eyes and imagined a life where Leo could attend a good school, where they could live in an apartment with walls that didn't sweat in summer, where she didn't have to choose between paying the water bill or buying his asthma medication. From the other room, Leo shifted in his sleep, murmuring something about superheroes. Zara opened her eyes, the city lights glittering outside her window like distant promises. For you, baby, she whispered. I'll try anything. The next morning, she was pouring the cheapest coffee she could find into a chipped mug when her phone rang. A voice as smooth and formal as polished silver spoke. Good morning, Ms. Garcia. This is Margaret from the Rodriguez estate. Mr. Rodriguez would like to meet you for an interview tomorrow at 8:00 a.m. Will you be able to come? Zara's pulse jumped. Yes, she managed, though her voice shook. I'll be there. She set the mug down with both hands when the call ended, almost afraid she'd drop it. She turned to Leo, who lined up his toy cars on the floor. She told him that Mommy has a big opportunity, kneeling to meet his wide-eyed gaze. And I'm going to do everything for you. That night, she stood in front of the mirror studying the reflection of a woman who had weathered storms and was still standing. She chose a navy blue dress. Her last decent piece of workwear combed her curls until they fell in soft waves, and thought of her mother's words. As long as you have a heart, nothing is impossible. Outside, the street lamps cast pools of golden light on cracked sidewalks. Somewhere down the block, music swelled again, a clear and sharp trumpet this time, as if the city was daring her to hope. This is my chance, she whispered to her reflection. And no matter what it takes, I won't give up. The smallest choices in stories like Zara's often lead to the most significant changes. Tomorrow she would step through the gates of a world she had only glimpsed from the outside. And perhaps if fate was generous, that world might open its doors to her. If you've ever leaped when the ground wasn't visible beneath your feet, you'll understand why Zara's next step matters. And if you want to walk this journey with her through the gates, into the heart of the Rodriguez estate, and toward a truth neither she nor Daniel could have predicted, stay close. Like this story, if it's touched you so far, share your thoughts in the comments and follow so you won't miss what happens when a single mother meets the man who will change everything. Because in New Orleans, under the slow spin of a ceiling fan and the watchful gaze of an old city, tomorrow was waiting. Morning in the Garden District had a way of feeling like it belonged to another century. The air was still cool from the night, holding on to the faint perfume of the jasmine that crept along iron fences and up the trunks of ancient oaks. Sunlight filtered through the branches in delicate dappled patterns, spilling over cobblestone sidewalks and across the facades of grand mansions, whose white columns and wraparound verandas had stood for over 100 years. Zara Garcia stepped off the streetcar at St. Charles Avenue, her heart knocking against her ribs in a rhythm she couldn't quiet. In her hand, she clutched the worn leather strap of her second-hand handbag. In her chest, she carried the fragile hope that this morning might be the start of something she hadn't dared dream about in years. Her navy dress was pressed as neatly as her old iron would allow. She had taken extra care with her curls, letting them fall naturally over her shoulders, framing her face in a way that softened the shadows under her eyes. The shoes on her feet weren't new scuffed at the toes and thin in the soles, but she'd polished them the night before until they caught the morning light. When she turned onto Prytania Street, she saw it. The Rodriguez estate rose beyond a towering wrought iron fence, the gates adorned with intricate scrollwork that curled like ocean waves. Beyond them stretched a manicured expanse of emerald lawn, broken by gravel pathways, and gardens bursting with red camellias and cream-colored roses. The main house, 3 stories of pale stone and tall windows, looked like it had been lifted from an old European painting and set down in the heart of New Orleans. Zara paused just outside the gate, drawing in a breath that tasted faintly of dew and magnolia. She didn't belong here. The thought came uninvited, cold and sharp like the edge of a blade. But she lifted her chin anyway. Belonging wasn't something she had ever been handed. It was something she'd learned to carve for herself. As she stepped forward, the gate swung open with slow, deliberate grace. She walked the length of the gravel drive, the crunch of each step loud in the morning's hush. Halfway up, a woman emerged from the side entrance of the house. She was tall and willowy, with silver hair pulled into a precise bun and a face that carried authority and refinement. Her navy skirt suit looked as crisp as the morning air. She said, "You must be Miss Garcia," her voice smooth but measured. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret." The woman's gaze swept over Zara, not unkind, but keen, as though measuring how much weight this newcomer could bear. "I've been Mr. Rodriguez's housekeeper for 17 years. Come with me, please." Inside the house was even grander than Zara had imagined. The foyer opened beneath a chandelier of crystal teardrops, catching and scattering the sunlight into prisms that danced along the polished marble floor. Oil paintings lined the walls, landscapes of distant hills, portraits of men and women whose eyes seemed to follow her as she passed. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and something more elusive, a clean, crisp note she couldn't quite place. Margaret's footsteps were soft but certain on the gleaming wood as she led Zara down a long hallway. She said, "Mr. Rodriguez is particular," her tone dropping into a quieter register. "He values precision. He dislikes wasted words. If you are honest and diligent, you will have no trouble." Zara nodded, though her palms had already begun to grow damp. "May I ask, what happened to him?" Margaret's eyes flickered toward her, the faintest shadow passing across her face. "An accident. Several years ago. It changed his life. You'll see for yourself soon enough." They stopped before a pair of tall oak doors carved with sweeping patterns. Margaret knocked lightly, waited momentarily, and then pushed one open. "Go in," she said, stepping aside. Zara's breath caught as she entered the room. It was an office, but not of the modern sterile kind. Dark wood bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and framed photographs climbed to the ceiling. A large window behind the desk opened onto a view of the back gardens, where the morning light lay in soft sheets across rows of blooming roses. Seated behind the desk was a man whose presence seemed to fill the space, even without rising. Daniel Rodriguez was in his mid-40s, his skin lightly tanned, his features strikingly cut, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of winter skies. They were not just blue. They were sharp, precise, a shade that seemed capable of cutting through pretense instantly. His brown hair was neatly combed back, though a few strands fell stubbornly against his temple. But what caught Zara's attention first was the wheelchair. Sleek and modern, it sat like part of him, his hands resting lightly on the armrests. The way he held himself, shoulders squared, posture exact, spoke of discipline and control, though the faint lines around his mouth hinted at strain. "You're the applicant." His voice was deep, which resonated more in the chest than in the ears. "Yes, sir," Zara said, keeping her gaze steady. "I'm Zara Garcia." He tilted his head slightly, studying her, the way a jeweler might examine a gem, searching for flaws, testing its strength. "Sit." She crossed the room and settled into the chair opposite his desk, the polished wood cool under her palms as she rested her hands. "Why do you want this job?" His tone was neither welcoming nor unfriendly, merely direct, as though the answer mattered less than how she gave it. She thought of rehearsed lines, the kind people gave at interviews, but they felt hollow in her mouth. Instead, she told the truth. "I'm a single mother. My son is 6. I want him to have a better life, a safe home, a good school days when he doesn't have to hear me say, 'We can't afford something he needs.' I'm willing to work as hard as possible to make that happen." His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in concentration, as though weighing the weight of her words. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind her. "This job isn't just cooking or cleaning," he said finally. "It involves personal care, bathing, dressing, and sometimes assisting with exercises. Does that bother you?" Zara's fingers tightened slightly on the arms of the chair. She hadn't been sure what to expect, but hearing it stated so plainly made her pause. Yet the image of Leo, his small hands, his unshakable trust rose in her mind. "No, sir," she said, steadying her voice. "I can handle it. Do you have experience with people who have disabilities?" "No," she admitted. "But I cared for my mother when she was ill. I learned patience and how to pay attention to small details. I'm a quick learner, and I don't give up." Again, that long, assessing silence. Then Daniel turned his chair slightly toward the window, as if dismissing her. "Start tomorrow, 7 a.m. Please don't disappoint me, Ms. Garcia." It took her a second to realize he'd just hired her. Relief and disbelief tangled in her chest. She rose, murmured her thanks, and followed Margaret out. As they stepped back into the hall, Margaret glanced at her with the faintest hint of approval. "You did well. Not many make it past the first meeting." The air outside felt different when Zara stepped through the gates again. Cooler, somehow sharper, as though the day had shifted in its axis. She was leaving with more than she had arrived with. A job, a chance, and the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, but could already feel pressing at the edges of her life. On the streetcar ride back to Treme, the city unfolded past the window. The bright colors of corner stores, the flash of brass instruments from a second-line parade in the distance, the slow sway of laundry lines strung between balconies. She pressed her hand against the glass and thought of Leo waiting at home. For him, she told herself. And for the first time in a long while, the words didn't feel like a burden. They felt like a promise. The next morning, a pale mist lingered over the streets of the Garden District, softening the sharp lines of the iron fences and the pointed tips of the wrought balconies. The fog made everything seem closer and farther all at once, like the world was caught between breathing in and breathing out. Zara arrived 15 minutes early. She had dressed in the crisp, light gray uniform Margaret had given her, smoothing every seam as if order in her appearance could calm the restless pulse in her throat. She crossed the wide gravel drive toward the front steps, her shoes crunching in the hush of the estate grounds. Margaret met her at the door, the faint scent of lavender following her. "Good. You're early," she said, her tone as composed as the pearl clasp at her collar. "Mr. Rodriguez doesn't wait for anyone." They moved through the echoing corridors, past rooms where polished wood and silk drapes held the memory of quieter centuries. The air inside was cooler than the summer morning, carrying a subtle, expensive fragrance that seemed woven into the walls. In the main bathroom, a cavern of white marble brass fixtures and the soft glint of beveled mirrors, Margaret outlined Zara's daily duties. She spoke in clear, unhurried sentences like a teacher specific to her pupils' potential, but unwilling to tolerate mistakes. "You'll assist Mr. Rodriguez with bathing and dressing," she said. "He likes things done quickly. Don't try to have a conversation unless he speaks first. And one more thing." Her gaze settled on Zara, sharp enough to slice through her composure. "He doesn't tolerate pity. Ever." Zara nodded, absorbing each instruction. She remembered her mother's final months, the way illness had stolen her strength, but not her pride. She understood. The faint hum of wheels on marble reached her before she saw him. Daniel entered, in a dark shirt, the sleeves rolled just enough to reveal forearms corded with quiet strength. His gaze passed over her, unreadable. "Let's begin," he said. The morning routine unfolded in silence, broken only by his occasional, precise instructions. "Warmer, water faster, with the towel watch my shoulder." Zara moved carefully, attuned to the subtle tension in his body, the way his jaw tightened when she brushed too close to a scar running along his upper arm. She didn't ask about it. Some wounds she knew closed better without the prodding of words. When they finished, she helped him into a tailored charcoal suit. Her fingers lingered at the knot of his tie for a moment, adjusting it just so. She was close enough to catch his cologne's clean, understated scent, something with cedar and a faint whisper of citrus. His eyes flicked to hers, cool and assessing before turning away. "You did better than I expected," he said. It wasn't precisely praise, but there was no ice in it. She managed a small smile. "Thank you, sir." Margaret appeared at the doorway, and Daniel wheeled himself out without another word. Zara exhaled slowly, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. Just before noon, Zara carried a tea tray toward the small sitting room. Sunlight pooled on the parquet floor, catching the rim of the porcelain cups. She was balancing the tray when a voice, smooth-honeyed and edged with steel, slid into the room ahead of her. "So, this is the new girl." Zara looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway. She was tall and slender, her golden hair falling in immaculate waves over the shoulders of a scarlet sheath dress. Her heels were the kind that announced every step like a claim of ownership. She smiled, but the type of smile was measured, not welcoming. "I'm Camille Hart," the woman said, moving into the room, with the unhurried grace of someone who had never been told to wait. "I manage certain affairs for Daniel." Her eyes swept over Zara like a jeweler, examining a piece of glass, searching for flaws, convinced she would find them. Zara set the tray down on the low table between them. "Zara Garcia, it's nice to meet you." "I'm sure it is." Camille said, her voice a gentle drawl that made the words feel heavier. "I hear you're a single mother." She lingered on the phrase as though it were a curiosity, an oddity to be turned over and inspected. "Yes," Zara replied evenly. "My son is 6. Camille's smile didn't reach her eyes. "This job isn't easy, Ms. Garcia. It requires a certain finesse. Not everyone has that." Zara felt the heat rise in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "I'll do my job well, Ms. Hart." The other woman's gaze sharpened a predator's flicker beneath the gloss. "I hope so," she said, stepping closer, until the scent of her perfume, expensive heady, brushed against Zara's skin. "Because Daniel doesn't keep useless people, and I don't like those who don't know their place." The words landed with the precision of a dagger. And just as quickly, Camille turned her heels, clicking against the floor, and left the room without another glance. Zara stood momentarily in the quiet, her hands still on the tray, her pulse loud in her ears. She wanted to let the anger burn to fuel her resolve, but she also felt the old ache beneath it, the part of her that knew what it was to be underestimated and dismissed before she'd even begun. Margaret found her later in the corridor, carrying folded linens. "You met Camille." she said, her tone more statement than question. Yes. She used to be Mr. Rodriguez's fiancée before the accident. Now she has influence here. Not as much as she'd like, but enough to make her dangerous. Be careful, Ms. Garcia. Zara nodded, tucking the warning away like a note in bold ink. That evening, the estate settled into a strange quiet. The long windows caught the gold of the setting sun, casting fractured light across the marble floors. Zara finished her last tasks in the kitchen, the smell of polished wood and faint citrus still clinging to her hands. When she stepped outside through the side entrance, the air felt warmer, heavier, the kind of New Orleans evening where the sky hung low and the air hummed with the promise of rain. She walked down the gravel path toward the gates, her shoes crunching in the stillness. The day had left her tired, but not defeated. She thought of Leo waiting at home with his neighbor until she returned. She thought of how Daniel's eyes had softened barely but enough when she adjusted his tie. She thought of Camille's thinly veiled threats and the promise she had made herself not to be moved by them. At the gates, she paused and looked back at the house. Behind those windows, a man sat in his chair carrying his weight of scars, some visible, some hidden. And Zara felt the faintest thread pulling taut between them somewhere in the weave of this grand guarded place. Not enough to name, not yet, but enough to keep her coming back. The third morning at the Rodriguez estate began with a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as though the house was holding its breath. Outside, the garden district lay beneath a quilt of gray cloud, the air heavy with the scent of rain yet to fall. The oak branches dripped from the previous night's shower, their leaves trembling in the occasional breeze. Zara arrived at her usual 15 minutes early. Margaret met her at the door with a polite nod, her voice even softer than normal. She said, "Mr. Rodriguez is in the study, but he'll expect you in the main bathroom shortly. Be ready." The bathroom was a cathedral of white marble and gold fixtures gleaming under the warm light of the sconces. Zara set to work preparing the room with practiced precision, folding the towels so the edges aligned perfectly, adjusting the water temperature until it was just right, laying out the black slate tray with bottles arranged in descending height. Something was calming in the ritual, as though every small act of order was a way of fortifying herself for the day. The sound of wheels on tile broke the quiet. Daniel entered in a slate gray shirt, the sleeves rolled back far enough to reveal the strong curve of his forearms and the pale lines of scars that disappeared under the fabric. His gaze swept over the room before resting on her. "Ready?" "Yes, sir." She helped him transfer from the wheelchair to the specialized shower seat, carefully keeping her movements smooth and steady. Daniel didn't speak at first, and she didn't force conversation. She'd learned in just 2 days that silence was as much a part of his armor as the way he sat or the deliberate stillness of his expression. Steam rose, blurring the edges of the marble around them. Her hands worked with efficient gentleness, mindful of the rhythm he seemed to prefer. But when she reached for the shampoo, her elbow caught the edge of the glass bottle beside it. The container toppled, striking the tile with a sharp clink before rolling to a stop. "I'm sorry." She began, bending quickly to retrieve it. Daniel's voice cut through low and tight. "What do you think you're doing?" The question was more than about the bottle. It was weighted with something else. He turned his head slightly, his eyes like shards of ice. "Do you understand me? Ms. Garcia, understand this life. Please don't pretend you know what I need." Zara straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but she didn't let the words land like a slap. She took a breath, steadying the quiver in her voice. "I'm not pretending, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm doing my job and trying to help you as best as possible." For a moment, neither of them moved. His eyes searched hers, something flickering there, surprise maybe, or the faintest hint of curiosity. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tension in his shoulders eased. He looked away, his voice quieter. "Just continue." The rest of the bathing went on without incident, but Zara could feel the subtle shift in the air between them. It was as though the invisible wall he kept around himself had developed a single hairline crack. When she helped him back into his chair, her hands brushing lightly against the fabric of his shirt, she noticed a longer scar trailing down his back, one she hadn't seen before. It looked old, the skin slightly raised pale against his tan. She wanted to ask how it had happened, to understand what moments had carved such marks into him, but she held her tongue. Questions like that weren't welcome yet, and she knew better than to push a door before it was ready to open. Once he was dressed in a dark navy suit, he glanced at her again. His voice was level, but there was an undertone she hadn't heard before. Better than yesterday. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't the cold, mechanical approval she'd received before either. Later that morning, Zara carried a silver tea tray toward the library. The house was quiet. The only sounds were the faint ticking of a clock and the muted hum of the air conditioning. The library was a rich, wood-paneled room with tall shelves that needed a ladder. Light from the high windows fell across the polished table where Margaret had left a few neatly stacked documents. She was arranging the cups when she sensed someone in the doorway. Camille. The woman leaned casually against the frame, a fitted black dress clinging to her like a second skin. Her expression was a careful blend of amusement and something sharper. "I hear you're settling in." Camille said each word wrapped in velvet, yet weighted with an unspoken challenge. Zara straightened. "I'm doing my best." Camille stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "Mr. Rodriguez isn't an easy man to work for. He has high standards, the kind most people can't meet." "I'll meet them," Zara replied, keeping her tone even. The smile Camille gave her didn't reach her eyes. "You may think you will, but this house has a way of showing people their limits." She took a step closer, her warm and heady perfume closing the space between them. "Don't mistake his civility for warmth, and don't think for a second that a few kind words mean you've earned a place here." Zara held her gaze. "I'm not here for kind words, Ms. Hart. I'm here to work." A delicate brow arched in mock surprise, but Camille didn't reply. She turned instead toward the window, letting her fingers trail along the edge of a bookshelf before leaving the room without another glance. The silence that followed felt heavier, like a curtain falling after a scene that had revealed more than the words spoken aloud. Zara was in the kitchen by late afternoon, wiping down the counters as Margaret prepared a tray for Daniel. The housekeeper glanced at her, then at the doorway Camille had exited hours earlier. "She came to see you." "Yes." Margaret gave a quiet sigh. She likes to remind people she's been here longer than anyone else. But longevity doesn't always mean loyalty. Zara thought of Daniel's scars, both the ones she'd seen and hadn't, and wondered how many bore Camille's fingerprints. When she left the estate that evening, the first raindrops began to fall, darkening the gravel path in soft, scattered patches. The air smelled of wet stone and the green tang of the oaks. She paused at the gate, looking back at the house, its tall windows glowing faintly against the dim sky. It still felt like a fortress, but she had been inside long enough to know that even fortresses had weak points. And for the first time, she thought she might have touched one. Monday brought a thin veil of sun to the garden district, a pale gold light that softened the edges of mansions and made the dew on the camellias look like scattered pearls. Inside the Rodriguez estate, the day moved with the quiet efficiency of a well-tuned clock. Doors sighed open and shut. Footsteps measured the long corridors. Somewhere a string quartet drifted from a speaker so discreet it seemed the house was humming. Zara arrived as always before the hour and was steadier than she felt. Habit had taught her that when you could not control outcomes, you smoothed linens-aligned bottles and set the water to the exact temperature a man wouldn't have to ask for. The bathroom gathered steam around them as she worked, and Daniel's low, contained voice cut the mist when needed. A little warmer, not the left shoulder, faster. She listened, adjusted and moved with him rather than against him. "Better," he said when it was done, and though the word fell as flatly as a paperweight, she felt the difference, the slight shift in barometric pressure after a storm blows past. By late morning, the estate exhaled into its quieter hours. Margaret had retreated to the back office with ledgers and a pencil worn to its ferrule. In the kitchen, Zara balanced a tray tea, a porcelain sugar bowl, a lemon sliced thin as coins, and crossed toward the library where Daniel waited for his noon calls. She'd nearly reached the door when Margaret's footsteps found her. "Ms. Garcia." A whisper of urgency beneath the composure. "There's a child at the gate asking for you. He came with your friend Alina." The tray steadied in Zara's hands, and then her breath did. Leo Margaret's expression softened. "He has something he says you must see. I've seated them near the side entrance." For a moment, every caution she'd learned about boundaries, about the unspoken rules of houses like this, rose like a wall. But then, the image of Leo flickered in her mind, his careful hands, the way he pressed his lips together when he concentrated. She set the tray on a console and followed Margaret toward the side hall. There he was, legs swinging from a chaise that had probably never hosted a 6-year-old before, clutching a paper roll to his chest like a treasure map. Alina sat beside him, apologetic and amused in equal measure. "He begged," Alina said, before Zara could scold or worry, "to show you the drawing. We won't stay." Leo spotted his mother and slid off the chaise. "Mom, look." He thrust the rolled paper into her hands, eyes bright. "I made it for you." Zara crouched to his height. "We'll look at it at home, baby. This is where I work, remember?" He nodded solemnly. "But I wanted Mr. Daniel to see too. Is he nice?" He whispered the last word, as if niceness was a secret you had to ask for softly. A hum of wheels on marble announced the answer before she could speak. Daniel turned the corner, the quiet authority he carried preceding him like a change in the weather. He took in the tableau, the child, the paper, Zara kneeling, and paused. His gaze moved to Leo with a kind of precision that did not feel clinical this time. "Who's this?" he asked, and there was no frost in the question. "My son," Zara said, rising. She felt every code of propriety prick her skin, but kept her voice even. "We won't take up your time." They were leaving. Leo took a fearless step forward. "Hi, I'm Leo." He held the paper out with 2 hands. "I draw well." Something, it might have been a smile, or the beginning of one, touched Daniel's mouth. "Do you?" He nodded to the paper. "May I?" Leo unrolled it carefully. The drawing was all saturated color and intention. A pale stone house with high windows, a garden full of roses, red as ripe apples, and 3 figures in the foreground. A tall woman with curly hair, a little boy whose stick-figure arms reached to both sides at once, and a man in a chair drawn not as diminished, but in bold strokes, his wheels like silver suns. "It's the house," Leo said, as if the resemblance could be in question. "And it's us. Mom says you like gardens." Daniel studied the picture longer than anyone expected. His thumb traced almost absently the circle of a wheel, as if he could feel the graphite ridges beneath the paper. Eventually, he looked up at Leo, and his voice had thinned to something quieter. "You do draw well." Leo tipped onto the balls of his feet. "I can draw you standing too if you want. I can draw you with a cane, or without. I can draw both." Zara's breath caught. She waited for the air to harden for Daniel to retreat behind whatever kept him upright. But his eyes went to her first, as if to ask permission. And in that slight deference, she saw a man who knew precisely where the power in a room might wound, and chose not to use it. "Come to the library," he said. "We'll give your art its proper audience." They entered the paneled room together, where the light came in like a blessing. Margaret appeared without being summoned, setting down lemonade for Leo, tea for Daniel, and at the conspirators' discretion, a plate of shortbread that Leo considered an essential part of any civilized meeting. "Please tell me what you like to draw," Daniel said. "People," Leo answered promptly, "and houses, and birds, and sometimes I draw feelings." He said it with the earnest gravity of children whose worlds still have room for magic. "For example, when I'm happy, I draw big circles." "What about when you're angry?" Daniel asked more gently than Zara had ever heard him. "Small circles," Leo said, "lots of them." "Ah." Daniel's mouth curved a whole astronomy. Zara watched the exchange with the peculiar ache that arrives when the world offers you more than you'd let yourself expect. She saw Daniel soften at the edges, a brightness around the eyes, a loosening of the jaw, and realized how rare it was to see this house, this man lit from within. She poured tea. He accepted the cup, and neither looked away too quickly when their fingers brushed for a heartbeat. It was going well, too well. Perhaps for that was the moment Camille's heels wrote their sharp punctuation into the corridor. She appeared in the doorway, emerald silk wrapped like a verdict around her frame, and assessed the scene with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. "What is this?" she asked pleasantly, which made it worse. Afternoons at the museum, Zara stood instinct making her body a shield. "We were just quiet, Ms. Garcia," Camille said, not looking at her. She addressed Daniel with a sweetness that was all blade. "You have a call in 20 minutes. And whatever this is," she flicked her gaze toward Leo, as if he were a misplaced ornament belongs somewhere else. Leo shrank by inches. Before Zara could gather him, Daniel set his cup down with a click that sounded in that room like the lifting of a gavel. "Camille," he said, his voice unhurried, "this is my home. I'll decide who belongs in it." Color rose and fell beneath Camille's cheekbones. "I was only thinking of," he said. "I know exactly what you were thinking of." Still calm. "And I'm not interested in your thoughts on the matter today." He turned to Leo. "Finish your lemonade." The quiet followed was not silence so much as authority settling into its rightful place. Camille's gaze slid to Zara, a promise and a warning in one hard, glittering sweep, and then she left with the perfume trail of someone who intended to return. Leo sipped. The world eased back into motion. Daniel nodded at the drawing. "May I keep it?" "I have a wall that's missing something." Leo's face flamed into a smile. "You can keep it forever." "Generous." Daniel said something like laughter in his voice. "Artists usually charge," Leo said solemnly. "I'll charge you when you can run," and Daniel astonishingly laughed outright. The sound startled all three of them and settled into the room as if it had always belonged there. They moved slowly toward parting after that, like a waltz that knows it must end, but lingers on the last turn. Margaret found a cardboard tube from some forgotten poster and helped Leo roll his spare drawing, the one he intended for their apartment, into it like a baton. At the side entrance, Zara knelt to straighten her son's t-shirt. "Thank you for being polite," she murmured. "I like him," Leo whispered back, as if this were a secret to be kept away from drafts. Alina squeezed Zara's hand. "We'll take the streetcar back. He'll talk the whole way, so prepare yourself later." When they were gone, Zara turned to find Daniel waiting where the light cut a clean line across the floor. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than the lemonade or the library. He inclined his head, and for a moment, he looked not like the fearsome man in charge of a small empire, but like someone remembering a long-forgotten room in his heart. He is disarming. He's 6, Zara said, unable to suppress a smile. That must be it. He looked aside, then back, as if measuring the distance between what he would say and what he could. He may come by again. Not often. The corner of his mouth moved, but sometimes. Something warm uncurling in her chest answered before her voice did. I'll tell him. He gestured toward the library. I have a wall to curate. She nodded and stepped back, conscious of the weight and grace of this new permission. As she moved toward the corridor, he spoke again lightly enough that if she wanted to pretend she hadn't heard, she could. Ms. Garcia. She paused. The circles, he said, eyes catching hers. I'd forgotten how to draw the big ones. Her smile was small but steady. They're still there, Mr. Rodriguez. Sometimes you need someone to hand you the pencil. The day resumed its work calls, made linens laundered the house, moving in its quiet orbit, but it did so around a new center. In the late afternoon, when Zara passed the library again, she noticed a rectangle of painter's tape on the wall and a gold thumbtack waiting like a tiny sun. By evening, the first raindrops began to bead on the windows. The scent of wet oaks drifted through the screens, and somewhere inside the house, a man sat in his chair, a child's drawing in his hands, and considered what it meant to step toward a future, one careful inch at a time. 2 days had passed since Leo's visit, but the echo of his laughter still lingered in certain corners of the Rodriguez estate, like a ghost that refused to fade, except this one was made of light. Zara noticed it in the softened way Daniel sometimes looked at her, as though a new question had taken root behind those glacial blue eyes. He hadn't asked it yet, but she could feel its presence between them, a subtle weight that shifted the air whenever she stepped into a room. That morning, the sky was the washed-out blue of porcelain streaked with threads of pale cloud. The scent of wet earth from a pre-dawn drizzle drifted through an open kitchen window. Zara moved through her routine with quiet precision, preparing the towels, laying out Daniel's change of clothes, checking the water until it was at that exact point between too warm and too cool. The marble under her shoes was cold, grounding her in the moment. When Daniel arrived, there was no preamble, just the smooth hum of his wheelchair gliding across the tile. He wore a crisp black shirt, today sleeves rolled neatly, revealing those same lean forearms she'd noticed. His gaze swept over the room, then met hers. "Let's get started," he said, but there was a subtle note beneath the words, something that lacked its usual steel. The bathing routine unfolded in its usual cadence, but Daniel seemed less guarded today. His instructions came without the clipped edge they usually carried. At one point, when she handed him a towel, his fingers brushed hers. It was brief, barely there, but enough to send a quiet ripple through her chest. When she had finished dressing him in a tailored charcoal suit, Zara took a breath, the words she'd been turning over in her mind since the night before, finally pushing to the surface. "Mr. Rodriguez, I heard from Margaret that there's a physical therapy room here. Have you ever considered using it again?" She didn't miss how his body stilled the faint tightening of his jaw. "I've considered it," he said slowly, and dismissed it. "My doctors clarified that walking isn't in the cards for me." Zara met his gaze steady and unflinching. Doctors have been wrong before. The sharpness in his eyes flickered, replaced by something closer to weariness. "You think optimism is enough to change what's broken?" "No," she replied softly, "but trying matters. And so does believing in what's still possible." She hesitated, then added, "Leo thinks you're strong. I do too." Silence stretched between them, Not heavy but charged like the moment just before a door swings open. Finally, he exhaled. Once he said almost to himself, but no promises. The therapy room was on the first floor, tucked away at the far end of a quiet corridor. Dust floated in the air, catching the sunlight streaming through tall windows. The space smelled faintly of disuse, though the equipment, a set of parallel bars, free weights, a balance board, stood in perfect order, as if waiting for the right hands to wake them from their long sleep. Daniel wheeled himself to the bars, his expression carefully neutral. Zara stepped beside him. "Take your time," she murmured, as she helped him position himself. His hands gripped the cool metal knuckles, pale with tension. Slowly he shifted forward, transferring his weight with controlled precision. Zara's hand hovered just at his back, not touching, but close enough to catch him if he faltered. The first attempt lasted barely 3 seconds before his legs buckled and he eased himself back into the chair. Frustration flashed in his eyes, sharp and fleeting. "Pointless," he muttered. "It's not pointless," Zara said firmly. "That was 3 seconds longer than yesterday, the day before, or the last 3 years. That's something." He glanced at her, a trace of reluctant amusement breaking through. "You're stubborn." "I've been told," she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. They tried again. This time he stood for 5 seconds, then 7. Each moment stretched into a quiet victory. Neither of them spoke aloud. When he finally sat back, his chest rose and fell with measured breaths. But there was no bitterness in his voice when he said, "Better than I expected." Zara placed a bottle of water in his hand. "She said you should expect more from yourself." And her tone was gentle, but unwavering. For a moment, he studied her like he had that first day in his office, but with less distance in his eyes. "You believe this can change anything. I believe change starts here," she said, touching her chest lightly before it happens anywhere else. At lunch, they returned to the kitchen. Margaret's eyebrows rose when she saw them both, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "You took him in there," she said to Zara, an almost conspiratorial note in her voice. "He stood," Zara replied, her smile quiet but confident. Margaret looked at Daniel, who gave a half shrug as though to deflect the moment's weight. "She's persistent." "Good," Margaret said, turning back to her work. Zara caught the flicker of pride in the housekeeper's expression before she left the room. Later that afternoon, while Zara was dusting the library shelves, the rhythm of the day shifted. She heard the measured click of heels, an unmistakable sound by now, and braced herself before Camille appeared in the doorway. The woman's gaze moved from Zara's hands on the shelf to her face, cool and appraising. "I hear you've been playing physical therapist," she said. Her voice dipped in that particular brand of politeness that cuts sharper than open hostility. "I'm doing my job," Zara replied evenly. Camille stepped further into the room, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the old paper warmth of the library. "Don't fool yourself. Daniel doesn't need someone filling his head with false hope." She let the words linger before adding, "You're stepping into a game you don't understand." Zara replaced a book on the shelf, her movements calm. If helping him stand is a game, it's one worth playing. Camille's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You think you're changing something here, but this house has swallowed stronger people than you. Maybe they didn't know what they were fighting for," Zara said softly. The silence between them was taut, a thread pulled to its limit. Camille's eyes narrowed slightly before she turned and left the sound of her heels fading into the distance. As Zara prepared to leave that evening, she passed the therapy room again. The parallel bars gleamed faintly in the low light, and she imagined Daniel there, hands gripping the metal jaw set in concentration. A small, steady pulse of hope rose in her chest. When she reached the gate, the air was cool, threaded with the faint smell of rain clinging to the oaks. She paused and looked back at the house. Behind those walls, she had seen something change today, not enough to call it a transformation, but enough to know the possibility existed. She thought of Leo's drawing with its bold wheels and open garden, and for the first time, she could see the picture shifting one careful step at a time. Rain came to the garden district in a slow, deliberate rhythm, that afternoon tapping against the tall windows of the Rodriguez estate. It blurred the edges of the camellias outside and left the air inside the house smelling faintly of damp stone and polished wood. Zara moved quietly through the hallway, her footsteps softened by thick rugs, carrying a folded stack of fresh towels toward the library. Margaret had asked her to tidy Daniel's private office. "He's in the West Wing for a meeting. You'll have plenty of time." And though Zara had been in nearly every room by now, she still hesitated at the carved oak door. There was a weight to spaces like his office, a subtle reminder that certain rooms held more than furniture and books. They had the private maps of a man's life. Inside, the air was warmer, lined with the scent of leather and cedar. The desk was a vast polished expanse, one corner neatly arranged with a set of fountain pens, another with a stack of manila folders. Zara moved first to dust the shelves, her fingers trailing lightly over spines of books, some worn soft by years of reading, others pristine, their gold lettering untouched. She was halfway through arranging the papers on the desk when one folder shifted the clip, catching against another. A sheaf of documents slid partway free. She reached to straighten them, but the numbers on the top page caught her eye. Long columns headings she recognized from her part-time bookkeeping work years ago. Profit and loss statements, except the margins here didn't make sense. The revenue totals seemed too low for a property like this. Expenses that bloomed in exact repeating amounts month after month. And then there was the note. It was a small square of paper clipped to the back of one report in hurried handwriting. "Don't let him suspect anything." Zara stood still, the room seeming to sharpen around her. The voice in her head reminded her she had no right to be reading this. But another voice she'd trusted more in recent months said she couldn't unsee it now. The name signed on several of the expense authorizations was Camille Hart. She felt her pulse quicken, the sound of the rain outside now like a steady drumbeat. For a moment, she weighed the consequences of doing nothing. After all, she was the new hire, here barely trusted, hardly rooted in this world. But she thought of Daniel's hands gripping the parallel bars, of the stubborn resolve in his voice when he said, "Better than I expected." Without hesitation, she thought of Leo's drawing and how he had given Daniel a place in the picture. Some truths once found had to be placed in the right hands. She gathered the papers carefully, aligning the edges, and left the library with her steps soundless on the rug. Daniel was in the sunroom, the muted light from the storm painting the walls in shades of silver and pale green. He sat in his chair near the window, his gaze fixed on the garden where raindrops clung to the roses. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, the line of his shoulders tightening at her tone. "Something wrong?" she said. "I found these in your office," crossing the room and offering the folder. "I wasn't looking for them. I was straightening things. But I noticed numbers that didn't add up." His brow furrowed as he took the file, flipping through the pages with practiced speed. The penmanship of his eyes changed as he read, sharp at first, then darker, heavier. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes." She kept her voice steady. "I used to do part-time bookkeeping. These expenses are inflated and some transfers led back to the same account." He closed the folder, his fingers resting on it for a moment. When he looked at her again, his gaze was not cold, but something else, something more profound. "Camille, The name was spoken without question. "I'm sorry," Zara said quietly. "I didn't want to intrude, but—" "You didn't intrude." He glanced back toward the rain-washed garden, his jaw tightening. "I thought, after the accident when most people vanished, she stayed. She said she'd help me rebuild." I believed her. Zara hesitated, then stepped closer. "Sometimes we see what we need to see, until we can't anymore." His eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment, she thought she had gone too far. But then his voice, when it came, was low, almost tired. "And you? Why bring this to me?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Because you deserve to know. And because you've worked too hard to have someone dismantle it behind your back." Silence settled, but it was not empty. It was the kind that holds a choice. He set the folder aside, his fingers lingering on the cover, as though sealing something closed for now. "You're a strange mix, Ms. Garcia," he said at last. "Stubborn, honest, dangerous in a way." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied softly. One corner of his mouth almost moved into a smile. "It is." The rain eased toward evening, thinning to a mist that clung to the windows. Daniel had retreated to his office again, and Zara found herself in the kitchen with Margaret, who was arranging flowers in a wide porcelain vase. "You've unsettled him," Margaret said without looking up. "I didn't mean to. Sometimes unsettling is necessary." She tucked a stem of pale roses into place. "Camille has been here a long time, longer than she should have. However, loyalty and time are not the same thing. He's always known it somewhere. You've given him a reason to see it." Zara thought of the way Daniel had looked at her in the sunroom, steady weighing not as an employer to an employee, but as a man seeing the shape of someone's choice. "I hope I haven't made things worse." "You've given him truth," Margaret said. "What he does with it is his choice." On the streetcar ride home that night, Zara rested her forehead briefly against the cool window. The city's lights streaked past, blurred by droplets clinging to the glass. She could almost hear Leo's voice in her mind, telling her about the next drawing he wanted to make, how it would be bigger, brighter, and show more of the garden. And she thought of Daniel sitting alone in his office, the file open under the lamplight. The weight of betrayal was quiet. It didn't shout pressed. She wondered if he felt it now, like she had once felt the absence of people she'd thought would stand beside her when the wind turned. Some people turned away from truths like that. Others used them as a pivot point. She had a feeling she knew which kind of man Daniel Rodriguez was. All afternoon, the sky hung low over New Orleans, a pewter lid holding in the heat. By 4 o'clock, the storm that had teased the city since morning gathered along the horizon, stacking blue-black clouds behind the live oaks, until the garden district looked like a painting paused before the first brush of rain. Inside the Rodriguez estate, the drawing room had been prepared ceremonially. The curtains were pulled back from tall windows, letting in a cool pewter light. A long table stood at the room's center, with water glasses, a leather folio, and a tidy arrangement of documents, columns of numbers and clipped notes that had spent the last night keeping one man from sleep. Zara set a final glass at the table's edge and straightened palms, briefly smoothing the invisible creases from her uniform. She could hear the faint murmur of voices in the hall, Margaret's calm measured, 2 others unfamiliar and professional. Lawyers. The scent of lemon oil and old wood carried the clean edge of inevitability. Daniel waited near the window, the pale light turning his profile into something cut from stone. He did not look like a man diminished by a chair. He looked like a man who had chosen his ground. When he turned toward Zara, his eyes had quiet purpose, something steadier than anger and deeper than pride. "I want you in the room," he said. Zara held his gaze. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He glanced toward the table, then back an almost imperceptible softening in the line of his mouth. "You brought the truth to me. You don't have to speak. Just be there." She nodded. The words settled into her like a hand to the spine. Margaret ushered in the lawyers. A gray-templed man with a careful way of folding his hands. Whitaker and a younger woman, Ms. Duval, whose pen hovered over her notepad like a musician's bow at rest. They greeted Daniel with professional reserve, and the room arranged itself around his chair, the space of authority expanding from him as light expands around a candle. Camille arrived last. She entered as if the door had been made for the length of her stride. Emerald silk, catching the fabulous day hair like poured gold. A smile that suggested she'd already decided how the conversation would end. Her eyes moved across the scene. The lawyers, the table, Zara, standing just behind Daniel's right shoulder, and lingered on that last detail before returning to him. "Daniel," she said, as though this were a reunion between equals. "You asked for me." "Sit down, Camille," he replied, his voice as even as a level line. She did, crossing one leg over the other with languid precision. Outside, thunder rolled once distant, a reminder that the storm had its clock. Whitaker opened the folio and slid a set of pages across the table. "We'll be brief. We've reviewed the ledgers for the estate and several affiliated properties. There are inconsistencies, such as recurring expenses and transfers to third-party accounts, that we cannot reconcile." Camille smiled with a patience that had cost a great deal to practice. "There must be a misunderstanding. I've managed those accounts for years. If a junior associate made an error, it wasn't an associate," Ms. Duval said, not looking up. "The authorizations bear your signature." A pause. The room inhaled. "To avoid doubt," Daniel said, and there was nothing complicated about his voice. It was simply true, and we'll discuss the figures now. He slid another document forward, the one with the clipped note that had burned a hole in Zara's thoughts all night. Camille's gaze flicked to the handwriting, and though she did not move, something minute shifted an eyelash's breadth and did not shift back. "Transfers." Daniel continued routing through heart management into a private account. "Margins are shaved in regular intervals. Enough to be clever, not enough to be honest." She laughed then softly. "You're quoting someone else's suspicions." "It's unseemly, Daniel. Numbers can be made to say anything when you're looking for betrayal. And yet they say what they say," Ms. Duval murmured. Camille's eyes slid to Zara, a deliberate pivot. "Of course. New influences. New confidants." She let the last word gleam like a blade. "You've always had a weakness for gratitude, Daniel. Give a girl a place in your house, and suddenly she thinks she belongs in your decisions." Zara felt the cut meant for her and did not flinch. She watched Daniel instead, the faint tightening in his jaw, the way his hand stilled against the armrest. "Careful," he said quietly. Camille tilted her head, puzzled by the limits of a game she'd invented. "I stayed after the accident," she said, voice softening into practiced sorrow. "When everyone else left, I remained. I protected your name, your assets, your dignity. And this is how you repay me, by believing a housekeeper with ambition." Zara said nothing. The word lay there small and mean as a pebble. Daniel said her name was Ms. Garcia. "And you will not speak to her or about her with contempt in my home." It was not a shout. It was a door closing. Silence pressed tender and merciless. Even the storm seemed to pause above the oaks listening. Camille's smile thinned. "You're making a mistake." Whitaker cleared his throat gently. "We've traced the funds. The documentation is sufficient for civil recovery, and if our client chooses criminal complaint, we prefer a negotiated return." Prefer. Camille echoed the sheen on her composure wavering. You imagine you can threaten me in this house? No, Daniel said, and the iron in his voice showed it was clean for the first time. I'm not threatening. I'm choosing. I want my money back. You will resign every authority you hold here, effective immediately. Margaret will collect your keys and access cards. Whitaker will provide the terms. Duval will file if you stall. Color rose fast and high beneath Camille's perfect skin. You think you can ruin me? I think you did that yourself, he answered. The windows flashed white as lightning stitched the sky, and thunder followed fast, close enough to rattle the glass. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Camille rose, the chair legs whispering on the rug. She said, "You'll regret this. Not to the lawyers, or the room to him. To the memory of the man she'd once been able to bend." Her gaze slid past Zara, cold as river water. Both of you will. Daniel did not look away. Leave. Margaret stepped forward from the doorway as if she had been standing in the seam of the wall, invisible until needed. She did not touch Camille. She merely opened the door and held it the way one holds a door at the end of a service, when the benediction has been spoken and the hymn is done. Camille passed out of the room in a rustle of silk and something darker, the sound of a life recalculating itself. The door latched. The storm let go. Rain fell hard and clean against the windows, washing the garden into a watercolor. In the drawing room, the air changed temperature, as if the house had exhaled after holding itself together for too long. Whitaker gathered the documents with the quiet competence of a man who had navigated 100 endings. "We'll begin the recovery process," he said. "You'll have a draft by morning." "Thank you," Daniel replied, and the lawyers slipped out, leaving the room in a hush that was not empty, but newly open. Zara stood where she had stood the whole time, near enough to reach him, if the earth tilted far enough not to take his strength from him by touching it. Now, when the room belonged to nobody but them, he turned his chair slightly toward her. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He gave a breath that was almost a laugh and nearly a sound of pain. It's an odd question to ask a man who has just fired his fiancée. "She fired herself," Zara said, and the corner of his mouth answered the briefest eclipse of a smile. He looked down at his hands. Fine tremor quickly mastered. "I thought loyalty and proximity were the same thing," he said. "I mistook endurance for care." "We all do," she said, "until something asks us to see again." His gaze lifted to hers, and there it was. The question that had lived behind his eyes since Leo's visit now stepped forward. Not a request, not possession, just a man asking whether the world could hold if he dared to move inside it. "Stay a minute," he said. "Sit, please." She took the chair beside him. The rain worked its patient pattern against the glass. Leo's drawing hung where he'd placed it that morning on the far wall, fixed with a small gold tack that caught the light and made the paper look crowned. He followed her eyes and breathed out something like relief folded into the sound. "I told Whitaker to leave that one file, and he said it was the one with the note." She nodded. "I wanted to keep it," he went on, "as a kind of artifact. Not to punish myself. I want to remind myself what it feels like when the floor gives way." He paused, then added quieter. "What does it feel like when someone offers you a hand instead of a rope?" Her hand moved then, almost of its own accord, not to the arm of his chair, not to the guarded places, to his wrist where pulse met skin. She rested her fingers there, light as breath. No claim, no rescue, just presence. His eyes closed momentarily, one heartbeat, two as if calibrating. When he opened them, there was less winter and more rain-washed sky. "Tomorrow," he said with the simplicity of a plan that knows it's worth the therapy room. "We'll go again." "We will," she answered. They did not speak for a while. The storm gentled. Somewhere in the house, a clock discovered the next minute and announced it softly. The world had the decency to let them sit in the aftermath without demanding they narrate it. When she finally rose, he did not say thank you. He did not need to. The room itself had learned a new shape around them, and gratitude was part of its architecture now in the chair angled toward the window, in the tack holding a child's vision to plaster, in the quiet between two people who had both in their separate ways chosen not to look away. Outside, the oaks let go their rain in bright beads. The Estate Fortress Museum stage felt for the first time like a house that might learn to be a home. And in the faint reflection on the glass, Zara caught the echo of them as they were in that moment, a woman standing a man, seated the space between bridged by nothing more than trust, and a hand that had learned exactly where to rest. Autumn came softly to New Orleans, slipping gold into the live oaks and a gentler blue into the sky. By late afternoon, City Park had the hush of a cathedral. The lagoons burnished the grass, clipped to a velvet hush, the air fragrant with cut roses and the faint far-off ribbon of a brass band practicing somewhere beyond the trees. Beneath an arch woven with white blooms and pale eucalyptus chairs waited in neat rows. A small string trio tuned the notes bright as glass. Zara stood behind the arch hands, resting on the bouquet Margaret had tied herself that morning, garden roses, and one sprig of jasmine for courage. Her dress was simple satin that caught the light like a held breath, a line of buttons down the back that asked for patience. Her curls fell in soft spirals, and in her eyes, steady luminous, was the quiet certainty of a woman who had paid for her happiness in installments and now finally held the receipt. Leo, solemn, in a gray vest, tugged at her hem. "Mom," he whispered, as if the trees had ears. "Are you ready?" She knelt so they were eye to eye. "I've been ready a long time." He grinned, and something in her chest unlatched. When the music began, it wasn't the usual swell. It was gentle, almost conversational, as if the violin had been waiting to tell its small, excellent truth this afternoon. Zara stepped forward. The world narrowed to the aisle, the lace of shadows on grass, and the man waiting at the end. Daniel stood beneath the arch with a cane tall in a navy suit cut to his new posture. He looked like a man who knew the ledger had finally balanced somewhere he never thought to count. His blue eyes found her, and the whole scene, the chairs, the flowers, the quiet paled to the single necessity of that gaze. When she reached him, he took her free hand. His fingers warm and sure folded over the place where a pulse kept the day honest. He leaned toward the cane, as one leans toward a companion grateful, but not defined. Margaret's smile gleamed from the first row. Alina dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that had seen too many weddings to be precious, and was precious for that very reason. The officiant cleared his throat, and the wind, punctual as ever in this city, tiptoed through the roses. "Friends," the officiant began, but the words of introduction hardly mattered. The vows did. Daniel spoke first, not from a script, but from a place that had learned to stop editing its tenderness. "I used to believe strength held power together," he said, voice steady. "Margins, deals, control. Then I forgot how to draw the big circles. A 6-year-old taught me again. You taught me again." He glanced at Leo, who sat straighter, entirely composed, until his chin trembled and he grinned to steady it. "Zara, you handed me the pencil. I promised to spend the rest of my days drawing circles around you, so there's room for breath, laughter, and the steps we haven't taken yet." Zara's reply came like light after rain. She said survival was the only bargain I knew, and her voice carried though it never rose. Rent, lists, a child's backpack packed by moonlight. Then you asked me to believe in something I couldn't see yet. I promise to keep believing even when the room tilts. To stand beside you when standing is work. Trust the small steps and celebrate the ones that feel like flight. When the rings slid home, applause broke like a soft wave over the lawn, and Leo, unable to stand it a moment longer, sprang up, flung both arms around them, and announced to everyone and the trees, "I have a dad." The string trio found a brighter melody. The sun leaned on the horizon. The new family, still learning to occupy this new shape, turned toward the reception, a long table under lights, strung like a pathway of stars. Chocolate cake waited decadent and unapologetic, its icing traced in circles per Leo's binding contract. They had just settled Zara's fingers, laced with Daniel's. Leo devouring the frosting with an artist's concentration when a figure appeared at the garden's edge. Emerald silk caught the last light. Camille. She did not enter so much as hover at the gate, ostensibly a guest who had taken a wrong path, really a storm that had misread its forecast. Conversation faltered, then fell into a hush. Daniel set down his fork. He rose with the cane's quiet click against stone, the movement careful, dignified. He did not keep her waiting, and he did not hurry. When he reached the gravel's edge, he stopped. The arch of roses framed him from behind. The gate framed her from before. "Congratulations," she said, the word heavy enough to dent itself. "Thank you," he answered, giving away nothing. Her gaze flicked to Zara, to Leo, to the circle they made. "You think you've won?" she said softly, as if soft could pass for kind. "You think recovery papers and a cane undo what I did for you?" Daniel's answer was almost gentle. "No paper undoes anything. It names it. And then you build." He tipped his head to the cane as if acknowledging its membership. "We're building." She looked at him, then not at the man she used to advise, but at the man who had learned to stand again without her, and worse, to love someone who wouldn't have survived the house she'd run. Regret betrayed itself at the corner of her mouth for a heartbeat, then vanished behind training. She said, "You'll hear from my attorney," though they both knew he already had. The threat sounded like a line she hadn't learned how to stop reciting. "You can," he said, "but not here, not today." Something in the set of his shoulders, neither defiant nor pleading, resolved, made the moment end. Camille stepped back. The city took her in like New Orleans does, with style and teeth. The gate clicked. The roses kept their shape. When he turned back, Zara had not moved. She had not once looked away. "Are you all right?" she asked when he reached her. "I am," he said, surprised to hear how true it sounded. They returned to the table. Margaret attempted to disguise her relief in the clatter of plates and failed adorably. Alina popped the cork from a bottle of something effervescent and insisted on principle that even miracles deserved bubbles. Leo tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Dance," he whispered, as though proposing a heist. The trio obliged with a slow waltz. Daniel stood, cane in one hand, Zara's palm in the other, and together they made a circle on the lawn the size of two people who had learned that progress is not a sprint, but a prayer. Step, breathe, hold. He found her eyes, and the music fell away. "Tell me when it hurts," she murmured. "I will," he promised, "and I'll tell you when it doesn't." They moved like that for a while, the kind of dance that doesn't measure itself by distance, but by consent. When the song closed its last measure, applause rose again, and Daniel bowed slightly deliberately to the two people who had taught him the choreography of living. Later, when the cake was mostly crumbs, and the lights had begun to glow against a violet sky, Leo crawled into Zara's lap, with a new drawing creased like a map from being held too tight. "For our wall," he said, catching Daniel's gaze to be sure the plural registered. 3 figures this time, all upright. The cane was drawn in silver pencil. Around them, circles, big ones, overlapping like halos, or orbits, or the architecture of breath. "It's perfect," Daniel said, and meant it, the way men mean something when their lives finally agree with their language. They left City Park. As the day changed, guards the trio, packing their instruments, the last light pouring itself carefully over the lagoon. In the car, Leo fell asleep between them, all trust and long lashes. A boy who had drawn his future and then walked into it. At the estate, no longer fortress, no longer museum, a house in apprenticeship to home. Margaret hung the drawing in the library beside the first two. The three together made a story you could read without words, a wheel bright as a coin, a step drawn forward, a family learning how to occupy its outline. Daniel and Zara stood shoulder to shoulder, quiet in the doorway. He reached for her, and she fitted herself into the offered space, as if the space had been built for her. "Tomorrow," he said, almost out of habit, as if the therapy room were a promise they hadn't finished keeping. She answered tomorrow, because love, like recovery, keeps time that way. If this moment stayed with you, if you felt the breath of those big circles, or the courage of that single step, tell us which part found you. Like, leave a comment with your favorite line or scene, and follow to stay close as we build this world. One careful step, one bright circle at a time. Morning came, rinsed clean. The storm had moved on in the night, leaving the garden district washed to its bones. Oaks shaking diamonds from their leaves, brick walks shining like lacquer. The air bright with the green scent that arrives after rain has told the truth to everything it touches. Inside the Rodriguez estate, light drifted through high windows in quiet pools, as if the house had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Zara arrived before 7. Margaret was already in the kitchen with a small pot of coffee and the encyclopedic calm from decades of weathering other people's tempests. She slid a cup across the counter without comment and added almost as an afterthought that he was awake early, not restless, resolved. Zara nodded. The words settled in her like a steadying hand. In the marble-bright bathroom, the morning ritual unfolded with a new ease. Daniel's instructions came not as corrections, but as coordinates. The space between them felt mapped, now measured by care rather than defensiveness. When she buttoned his shirt, he tipped his chin without being asked. When she straightened his tie, his gaze found hers, briefly, deliberately, and held. "Therapy room," he said, and his voice was a line drawn on a clean page. "Let's not out-talk the day." They had prepared the room the previous evening, Zara with a cloth, and a patience that felt like prayer. Margaret with a window key to let the damp lift Daniel with the silent, stubborn presence of a man setting his place at a table he had once abandoned. Now the parallel bars gleamed. The clock on the wall clicked its modest seconds. Dust had retreated to the corners like doubt, with nowhere to sit. Zara positioned the chair, locked the wheels, and stepped to his left. She said, "We'll take it in pieces." Her voice tuned to a softness that did not coddle hands, breath, shift hold. "I'm right here." He nodded and gripped the bar. Tendons rose under skin, the measured architecture of effort. He leaned forward, set his jaw, and with the fierce economy of someone who has decided where to spend pain, raised himself into standing. The bars took the tremor that ran through his arms. Zara's palm hovered an inch from his back, close enough to catch him, far enough to honor the ground he claimed. 3 seconds, then 4. He sat. Again. 6 seconds, then 8. Sweat collected at his temple in a single bright bead. Again. 9 seconds, then 10. When he lowered himself, the exhale left him in a sound that wasn't defeat and wasn't relief either. Something stranger. The unfamiliar physics of possibility. Zara handed him water. "How do you feel?" Extremely mortal, he said, dry as linen, and then because the room had earned it, he let the smallest smile show. Also, persuaded. By what? That standing isn't an incidental miracle, he said. It's an argument. They rested. The house ticked. Somewhere beyond the door, a radio murmured the blues at a low volume that felt like the building's pulse. Near noon, Margaret opened the door with a careful knock that never startled her. "You have a guest," she said, managing to attach no weight at all to the words. Leo came in like a bright coin rolling through the doorway, Alina behind him with a conspirator's grin. He wore a t-shirt with tiny planets orbiting a sun and held his newest drawing in 2 hands, the way children carry the things that matter. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," he said, pronouncing both names like an honor. "I made you a picture of you walking. It's imperfect because I haven't seen it yet, but I know how." Daniel's laugh, still rare enough to startle the room's corners, arrived and stayed. "Do you excellent. Perhaps you'll instruct me." Leo planted himself beside the bars, solemn with purpose. "I'm your coach," he announced. "Rule 1 is big circles for breathing." "Big circles," Daniel repeated, and glanced at Zara with a look that remembered the conversation about circles and made something inside her tilt. They tried again. Hands, breath, shift, hold. This time, Daniel didn't stop at standing. He tightened his grip, found where fear lives, and set a foot across its border. The movement was small, 1 inch, then 2, but its intent shook him like thunder under marble. His left foot slid forward, seeking purchase. The world narrowed to the geometry of weight and will. Zara's voice found the low register people use when rescuing isn't what's needed. "I have you," she said. "Pick the floor, not the fear." He did. The right foot lifted, not far, but enough to clear its history, then set itself beside the left. For a heartbeat, the room forgot how to inhale. Then he sank back into the chair with a sound that might have been a laugh and a sob, and covered his eyes with the back of his hand. Leo exploded into applause, as if an entire orchestra had just found the note it had been searching for. "You did it. You did the step." Zara couldn't help but laugh at the ache rising behind her sternum. She crouched to eye level with Leo. "Coach," she said, "I think we have to pay you." Leo considered his fee with the gravity of 6 years and the infinite market value of hope. "You can pay me in cake." "Done," Daniel said, voice roughened, and his eyes were bright when he lowered his hand. "The finest cake New Orleans can produce." "Chocolate." Leo bargained with circles. "Of course," Daniel said, "with circles." They rested again. The air had changed temperature. Even the clock's modest ticking sounded altered, as if time had flexed 1 vertebra and found a better posture. Alina took Leo to the kitchen in search of cake and circles. Margaret followed up by negotiating terms with the pantry. The therapy room was briefly theirs alone. "Congratulations," Zara said softly. He looked at her as if measuring the exact weight of the word, then let it stand. "It was a step," he said. "Not a miracle." "Miracles need somewhere to land," she answered. "Steps are good ground." Silence folded around them, tender and unafraid. She knelt to retie the lace on one of his shoes, a pretext that let her hands be where gratitude wanted them to be. When she sat back on her heels, his hand found the edge of the bar. Then hesitation, permission, decision found her wrist. The touch held nothing that could be mistaken for pity. It was precisely the pressure of a man thanking someone for refusing to move when the room tilted. "Zara," he said, trying her name, as if it were a language he almost remembered. She felt heat rise not to her cheeks, but somewhere lower, steadier. "Yes, I thought I knew what counted," he said. "Margins, acquisitions, the posture of power." Today, a 6-year-old taught me how to breathe. Children do that, she said, and couldn't keep the smile from her mouth. They're costly, but the teaching is free. Noted. His thumb moved once across the pulse point beneath her skin and lifted a promise to be careful with a fact he could not unknow. They went again to honor the truth that the first deserve company. This time, the left foot moved with less argument from the body that carried it, and the right followed with something like faith. When he sat, he did not hide his face. He looked past Zara to the window and let himself be seen. 2, he said. 2, she echoed, as if the number itself were a sacrament. The door clicked. A shape appeared in the threshold, a slash of emerald against the pale hallway. Camille. For an instant, the room forgot to contain only forward motion. She stood there, rain-damp hair, darker at the edges, eyes fixed on Daniel's hands. She said one step was not quite a scoff, nor anything kinder. How moving. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Leave, Camille, he said without looking away from the bars. I won't warn you again. A beat then, too. Something in her face rearranged to accommodate a world that no longer fit her. She turned, and her perfume went down the corridor, like an argument finally running out of words. Zara let out the breath she hadn't meant to hold. Daniel's mouth curved in a line, acknowledging what had passed, and finishing it. By late afternoon, the work of triumph had made everyone gentle. Leo returned from the kitchen dusted with cocoa and joy. He presented Daniel with a paper crown Margaret had magicked from an old roll of gold ribbon. Kings wear these when they win, he explained. Daniel bowed gravely. Then I accepted on behalf of my legs, which are slow, but susceptible to bribery. They left the therapy room, not as patients and staff, but as a small, odd procession boy-woman, man in a chair wearing a crown made of ribbon, following the path sunlight made across the floor. In the library, Daniel tacked Leo's new drawing beside the first. 2 figures, now one seated wheels bright, one vertical, a line drawn forward from the body, like a sentence refusing the period. Not perfect, Leo said, but getting there. That's the motto, Daniel answered. Alina and Leo bundled toward the streetcar when it was time for goodbyes. At the side door, Zara knelt to fix the tilt of Leo's backpack. Proud of you, coach. Proud of him, Leo said, jutting his chin at Daniel. He did the circles. After they'd gone, the house folded back into its quieter shape, but it did so around a new center. Daniel wheeled to the window, where afternoon light caught dust like soft confetti. Zara stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, sharing the view. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, she said. Outside, the oaks held the light as if it were something they could keep. Inside, a man and a woman considered the small, enormous distance a single step can cross, and how sometimes that distance is precisely the length between 2 people who have decided not to let each other fall.